Good afternoon, everybody. Doing my best Chris Mad Dog Russo intro there, I guess. That's how he introduces every show, or he used to anyway. I don't actually listen to him that much on, I think he's still on Sirius. But back in the day, in the days of the old Mike and the Dog show, that was every single day when he was on. That was how he introduced the show. So what the hell. Little Chris Mad Dog Russo to get things started here. Thanks for joining up, everybody, hanging out behind the scenes here. I know we got the basketball shows on behind the, or in front of the paywall on the other side of things, but for everybody who's doing baseball tonight, for the main slate, we had an earlier show that focused on the main slate, the deeper dive show, but I thought it would be good to take a look as we get into lock here, and since I didn't get to talk about it, and I was going to be doing this anyway, I thought it might make sense instead of doing it at the same time as the deeper dive to push it back, make it a little proxy live before lock for the main slate here for MLB. So we'll go through quick little game by game, just run through some of my thoughts about the slate, and then I've got Fantasy Cruncher fired up in the background. I figure we'll generate some actual lineups and take a look at what's coming together. I'm going to jump off probably sometime around 6:30, just so I can get my own lineups finished and built and actually entered and everything. You guys have seen how some of this slows down for me, so we'll see how we do in terms of that. If things are flying along, maybe we'll just stay on right up till lock. We'll see what happens. So let's jump into the slate. I don't know if you guys can hear the cat going nuts. He's locked out again. Hates being locked out of the room. Talked about it, I think, yesterday. But, yeah, let's take a quick peek here. We've got all the lineups except for one, which is nice and handy for talking about the slate coming in. Probably makes sense to start with the pitchers, as usual. So let me scroll over here. We got the pitchers hiding over this side. And we're going to be talking somewhat FanDuel focused, of course, but I've got Alex's DK projections loaded up over here, so I'll work those in, of course, around the edges. It's an interesting slate in terms of pitching. We've got a bunch of guys priced in like a really, really similar tier. So I'm really curious to see how the ownership breaks down across the Blake Snells, Eduardo Rodriguez's of the world. I'm getting a really low projection on Dustin May for reasons that remain unknown to me right now, but I'm going to change that. You're going to see me change that in Fantasy Cruncher. I'm just going to go with probably just whatever Alex has or some modified version of that. I actually want to take a look if he's got a wonky innings projection real quick. Why isn't he on the board? There he is. Yeah, that's part of the reason. He's coming up with a... Let me change that. That'll help, but it's still not going to be enough. Yeah, it still only gets him to 23.49. I think he's in a better spot than that. I mean, this is a more realistic projection for my model to be coming up with here. But I just think it's not accounting for some of the recent changes we've seen. I wrote about it in the article this afternoon. He's up to like a 14-something% swinging strike rate. He was in like 9s last season. So he's made significant progress there. He's throwing something like 32% strikes combined. So just a ridiculous jump in his strikeout rate overall. So he's just pitching great. And he's in a high-end strikeout matchup going up against Milwaukee there. So I like the spot for Dustin May more than my projections are indicating here. I think Alex's projection is more in line. This is a DK projection, of course, 18.27, but you can see how it ranks out comparatively to the others. So May should probably be up in this spot where Charlie Morton is. I mentioned it with the power index, and it's also applying to the Morton projection here in my model. This is not taking into account the current field that Toronto's playing on. I have to figure out a good way to work that in around the edges here so that we get accurate projections because they're playing on essentially a Little League field right now down there. So Charlie Morton is not that high ranked. I think Dustin May is probably higher than this, and the power projections we're getting for Atlanta and Toronto that you'll see should probably be higher. They were the ones that were in my article this afternoon for the home runs. So a little bit to take care of manually and mentally as we look through this. But I think we've got two, premium pitchers in Blake Snell and Eduardo Rodriguez. Snell, obviously the more talented guy in a very high-end spot against San Francisco, and then Eduardo Rodriguez in a ridiculously good strikeout spot against Texas here. So I really like both of those. They project out well. I'm uncomfortable paying this much for Eduardo Rodriguez when Blake Snell is on the slate for 8,800. I think that's probably applying... Oh, shit, you guys can't see that. Let me scroll over further. I just saw what you guys are able to see on this board here. Let's see. All right, now we can see it a little bit better. Sorry about that, guys. So, let me get back over here. So, like I was saying, it's just difficult for me to pay 9,500 on a single pitcher site for Eduardo Rodriguez when Blake Snell is 88. I even like the Zach Gallen option going up against the terrible Colorado lineup against right-handed pitchers and on the road. He's 9,000. I'm a little uncomfortable paying that when Blake Snell is 88. So I just expect to have a lot of Snell on this slate. He was the top option on the board, I think. If you can check the top starters tool real quick, I'll jump over there. So let's see. I think he was third on the DK board, and we can talk about this because we're behind the paywall. So Snell coming up third on the DK board. I know you guys can't see it. If it becomes important, we'll flip it over. And second overall on the FanDuel board, and he's getting triple that ownership essentially on FanDuel. He's coming up 29.5% owned as compared to an 11.7% probability second on the board of success with Gallen above him. Gallen above him on both sites. Gallen also drawing 21.2% ownership. The interesting one on the board to me, and the reason I brought him up earlier, is Dustin May getting about half of what he should be owned on DK. He's 28% likely to be the top two, and he's coming up 15% owned. And on FanDuel, Alex has him 11.3% to be the top, which compares favorably with Blake Snell, Zach Gallen, who are at 11.7 and 13.7 respectively, and you get Dustin May at 4.3% ownership. So I know he's the most expensive, but that's a very, very strong pay up to be contrarian spot if that holds. I'm very, very interested in that. And then you get down to Eduardo Rodriguez, also pulling a little bit of heavy ownership. Similar story. We'll go back to the board over here. Similar story with Griff Canning, where they're both getting owned more than their projected value on the and projected probability of being an upside start. I like Canning, given that he's 6,000 going up against what is a fairly weak Seattle lineup. I just think there's a lot of value in that salary. I don't know that we need it necessarily, but there are some interesting stack combinations that you can get together. My placeholder I just built with Canning just because I wanted to put two very high-end offenses together, and he was the right way to do it in terms of the available pitchers at that salary range. Like, I'd much rather have a Griff Canning than I think a Jordan Lyles taking on the Boston Red Sox for more. Certainly than Travis Bergen, who's just going to be opening and maybe pitching like 2-3 innings. Certainly more than LJ Newsome, who I think is going to get lit up by that Los Angeles offense. So I think for the money, he's the best option on the board. It would probably make sense if DeSclafani was priced down more, but he's at 8,100 on FanDuel, 84 on DK. So you'd like to see him come in the value range. I wrote about Austin Gomber on the slate, but not in terms of playing him, but just in terms of his ability to limit power, limit home runs that he's shown so far through his career. It's a really small sample. It's a lot of event-based stuff that isn't necessarily predictive. Like, just because a guy missed barrels last year doesn't mean he's going to miss barrels this year. A lot of that depends on stuff, but a lot of it also is happenstance, particularly when you're talking about a ridiculously small, I think it was a 29-inning sample. So there's reason to be skeptical in terms of his ability to limit that, and Arizona's been fantastic against lefty pitching. For me, it was kind of a warning sign both ways. Like, I don't want any Austin Gomber anyway. I didn't see any upside in getting to him on the slate, despite the fact that he could potentially cap the Arizona offense. But Arizona's explosive upside could potentially be capped by Austin Gomber in this spot if those trends continue. And they were getting, as of when I wrote that article earlier this afternoon, they were the most overowned stack on both sites. So for me, that's kind of a stay away on both sides in terms of Gomber and in terms of the Arizona offense. Not getting to, I am getting to a good amount, I think, of Zach Gallen, and it'll be interesting to see where Colorado comes in terms of their stack. Let's see, who do we not talk about? Charlie Morton, I mentioned, playing on a Little League field. I'm really worried about that. You can see, I think that's reflected in the salaries on both sites as well. I'm still getting a good projection for him because it's looking at some strikeouts and it's not taking the ball field into account, but I'm worried about that spot. Woodruff, I'm concerned about paying that much for in the matchup against the Dodgers. We've talked about the Dodgers a bunch of times. Woodruff, excellent upside, definite strikeout option. But we can see, taking a look at this one, look at me moving it over in the right time. Taking a look by some of these metrics for this year, Dodgers 177 team ISO. We can see power still out against righties, but 177 team ISO ranks him 7th in the league. 23.9% strikeout rate puts him in like the middle of the pack, but that's not one of the more aggressive marks so far. 18% better than average best in baseball, I believe. Yeah, best in baseball creating runs against righty pitching. So there's some concern there. You know, we definitely got upside in the pitcher, but there's definitely that's the good pitcher in a bad spot on this slate. So there's something to be concerned about there. So I'm curious where he comes in actually on the top starters tool for each site. Let's see. Yeah, so Woodruff ranking around the middle, 9.7% projected probability of being the top starter on FanDuel, which if you remember the numbers from before, oh good, we got the other lineup. Thanks, News God. So if you remember the other numbers from before, like that 9.7 ranks him pretty much. There's not much difference between that and the 11.3 we've got on Dustin May, the 11.7 on Blake Snell. He's also coming in under owned for that mark, but it's concerning. Like it's a much worse matchup than May on the other side taking on the Brewers. So I would rather have May, but I'll probably work in some shares of Woodruff around the edges here, I would think. So that's an interesting look on the DK slate. So Woodruff's more actually interesting, I think, on DK because we're getting him 22% probability of being one of the top two, which is right in line with Eduardo Rodriguez, and he's getting way less ownership. It's a much higher price. 10-1, he's the most expensive DK option, but you're paying up to be contrarian there. That's a pretty interesting spot. 22.2% likely to be a top two pitcher, only 12.3% owned. If you're pairing Woodruff and Dustin May on the DK slate, you're getting two guys who are owned about half of where they should be owned. I think that's a really interesting spot. You're paying through the nose to do it, 9,800 and 10-1. I don't know if you can do it and get to interesting enough stacks to make it work, but if you can figure out good stacks to work with there, that is a really appealing combination. I suspect you can't do that, which is where Zach Gallen comes into play, which is where some of these other guys come into play. Eduardo Rodriguez, certainly for 8,700. But if you can figure out a way to pay for that combination in terms of not sacrificing too much with your stack, kind of interesting. What else have we not talked about in terms of pitching? I think that covers everybody that I'm interested in. Like I said, I don't think I want many DeSclafani shares. 8,100, I think I'd rather get to Canning even if he's overowned. I would maybe take some. He's at least worth looking at. I shouldn't let bias and everything come into play there. So he ranks similarly. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to see, right, when we're looking at it. And we'll see if it's on the FanDuel one as well. I know you guys still can't see this. Yeah, so what we're seeing for DeSclafani, I'll click over to that. So what we're getting for DeSclafani is right here. And it's what I wanted to see in making that pause and deciding to look at the board. This is exactly what we're looking for tournament upside. He's taking on a Padres lineup that is one of the better baseball teams in baseball. I talked about this a couple times earlier in this week. I just question their overall upside going forward all year long for DFS outside of the couple guys who are superstars for sure, but always chalky. A lot of the other hitters in that lineup, I question some of their overall upside. They're a very good baseball team. I'm not saying the Padres are not a good team. But you can see DeSclafani here, interesting spot. 8,100 puts him right in the middle. He's ranking out. This 8.3 is not all that different, again, from these 9s and these 11s. And there is just no ownership on the guy. That's the FanDuel slate. On the DK slate, it's kind of similar, right? 14% probability. This is getting further afield from these 20s than this mark was from these 9s and where you're getting a single pitcher. So the utility in combining these guys where you can is greater than what we're getting, I would think, utility-wise in the 14% of DeSclafani. But again, nobody going to be on him. 2.3% projected ownership. So, I mean, that's a good spot. The Morton one is a little concerning still, like I've said, but again, given the fact that nobody's going there, you can leverage that in a tournament. So it's not off the board by any means. There's certainly strikeout upside. Charlie Morton's a veteran guy who knows how to pitch in a bad environment. So I wouldn't completely sweat those spots given all that leverage. That's kind of interesting. I think it's a good slate to go a little bit broad with some of the ways that you're combining some of these guys and maybe look to use Woodruff and use May as your SP1s. Maybe leave some of the other guys who are super over-owned, over-leveraged here at similar projections of being in the top 2. Use those SP1s, combine them with some of these other guys who are super low owned, and that's a different path toward probably some pretty good constructions. It's an interesting slate. I really, I think the pitching on DK is particularly interesting. That's a really unique way to see the pitching options come together. Taking a look at some of the stacks. Actually, since I'm already showing the site, why don't we just talk it through on Top Stacks? Let me open up another one. Slow us down even further because these are on different pages altogether instead of different tabs. Don't exactly know why we do that, but probably because we need a bunch of tabs for the different slates, I would imagine, if anybody's wondering, like I was. We can see, I just talked about it, Arizona still very over-owned for their probability of success, right? They're coming in 8.1, a negative 8.1 leverage score with a 16.8 ownership share on that slate, on that stack. Second highest owned stack in terms of the entire slate. Second only to the Braves on the other side of that Toronto game. But you can see the Braves are a lot closer to their probability of being one of the top stack, being the top stack on the DK slate. So they're only a negative 1.4 despite this heavy ownership. You can kind of get into that still at only a negative 1.4. It's not exactly where you'd want to see them, but they're also a strong value play. So that's just a really, really interesting spot for the Braves. I suspect they're going to be super chalky and possibly break through that ownership mark that we've got there. But I think it makes sense. I think they're a building block kind of a team today. That's less applicable, building block versus over-owned chalk, as it is on the NBA slates, where guys are just supposed to produce. So when you see the pricing and all of these things, it kind of, a guy can break down differently. But even with the variance of baseball, like that is a significant margin. They're almost twice as likely to be the top stack as the Red Sox are. So that's pretty significant, pretty interesting. So I'm into that. I'm into that Brave stack here. On the FanDuel side, they rank out similarly. Top of the board, yeah, negative 2.3 leverage. They were getting a little bit of positive leverage earlier in the day on FanDuel, but that didn't hold up, which makes a lot of sense. Extreme value play as well on the FanDuel slate. FanDuel's pricing is just all over the place. But we can see definitely public getting there. But again, like I would rather get to this where they're, I know it's not twice, but a significant margin higher likelihood than getting to these guys getting there, and these guys are more negatively leveraged. So higher aggregate ownership, but more negatively leveraged plays here. So I'd rather get to the highly owned Braves and just figure out good ways to put them together with some of the stacks that do have positive leverage. Like if I can get a Braves and Dodgers stack here, I'm pretty happy about that, right? Because this 6. Again, I know it's twice, and I was just saying twice about these ones, but once we get into some of these positive, like we've got to find some offense somewhere, right, guys? So it's the Dodgers. They're one of the better lineups in baseball. You could argue that that's a spot where you can get into, combining some Arizona and their value with some of these other guys who are, creating these negative leverage spots and look at it that way. I prefer to do it from the top down. I think that makes more sense. Don't really like the looks of Texas here, but they're getting significant positive leverage, most highly positive leverage team on the FanDuel slate. But you guys have heard me badmouth that Texas lineup all year long, so I'm not going to jump to it now. And they ran kind of down the board there. Just looking for other options on the DK slate that we didn't necessarily talk about. So yeah, it breaks down somewhat similarly in terms of where the public is. A little bit of room to work with on the Red Sox though, which is nice. A little bit more expensive, so they're a little more difficult to roster. Maybe that's where we'll jump into on the old board over here. Let me move this back over. I'm going to move it and then check what you guys are able to see so that it actually aligns perfectly instead of talking it through halfway and then realizing you guys can't see it. If it would just scroll over for me at all. Let's see. This is just game data over here that you guys haven't seen. This is pulling the team hard hit rate in that last little column. There's some over-under info and the game totals and the line, and then a couple team stats as well, which is funny that I would run this completely separate team stats board over here because it's already pulling some of that info over there, but I do things in weird ways. So yeah, fortunately the Red Sox were right up on top here, which is nice. So we can see, like I said, they're priced up through the middle here, and these are really a lot of the hitters that you want to get to. But I mentioned some of these guys down at the bottom of the lineup last night, and they're significantly under-owned again tonight. Hunter Renfroe getting some ownership at 3,100 here, but I like the power upside for all three of Dalbec, Renfroe, and Franchy Cordero in this spot against Jordan Lyles, who is not much of a pitcher. We can see Lyles 18.5% strikeout rate in 24 innings so far this year, 13.5 last year in 57 innings. There's just not much on the table there. 5.89 xFIP last year, 5.25 this year. Fire away with Red Sox bats where you're getting leverage on them on DK. They're a lot higher owned on FanDuel because they are a lot easier to get to at these prices and the way this thing comes together. So people are going to be there like crazy on the FanDuel slate, but I think they still make a lot of sense to at least look at in some of your stacks. And, if you want to get a little under the field like I was talking about on the top stacks board, it might make sense, but it makes a lot of sense to include them for sure. And you can get away from the field on some of these bats that I like. Christian Vasquez, he's a catcher. You don't need to roster a catcher on FanDuel, but that's often a way to get different with it. And at only 2,300, he's a better hitter than that. And then the power options at the bottom of the slate there. Definitely Bobby Dalbec gives you a little bit of ability to differentiate a lineup at 8.8% owned. Even JD Martinez, 15.9% owned. Like that's not crazy. Alex Verdugo, 17.1. Those are high numbers, but they're not ridiculous. So it's an interesting spot for sure. More so on the DK slate where if you can figure out a way to pay for it, like you're going to get into this and that combination of pitchers we talked about. But if you can figure out a good way to pay for that stack and those guys at the bottom of the order help you do it, I think that's an interesting spot. Like I said, I don't think I'll be getting to much Texas, even with positive leverage going up against Eduardo Rodriguez here. Just a tough spot for them. They are, as of last check, they were one of the worst in the league. Let's just find out real quick. I know you guys can't see this. Don't sweat it. I'm just going to tell you what it says. They are somewhat respectable in terms of relative to this season. They sit 10th in the league with a 25.8% strikeout rate against lefty pitchers, but that's because strikeouts are so up at the bottom against lefty pitchers. Typically, the 26th percent team is like the bottom. Right now, that, like I said, sits 10th. The worst team in the league against lefties is the Detroit Tigers. 36.9% strikeout rate so far this season and a hilarious .073 ISO. They're just bad. My Yankees beat up on them today again, which was nice. So, I think this is a good spot for Eduardo Rodriguez like we talked about. It's a tough spot for this Rangers lineup. Could they come through? Of course. They do have reasonable power marks here. So I'm not saying take them off the board. I'm just saying they're not a priority play for me by any means. We'll see them mix into a couple stacks as we jump into stack building in a minute. I did want to look at the Dodgers because they were popping out on the stack board here. Let's take a peek. We kind of know what's in that lineup. So they're going up against Woodruff, which we talked about. High-end strikeout pitcher, 31.5% strikeout rate this year, 29 innings, 31-1 in 73 innings that year, 29% strikeout rate 2 years ago. So getting into some of these Dodgers, they're one of the best lineups in baseball. Nobody's questioning that. I think the prices are right. Like, these aren't overly aggressive prices for any of these hitters. Only Mookie priced over 4,000 on the FanDuel slate. Only Mookie and Turner priced over 5,000 on the DK slate, but getting to Corey Seager at 4,900, getting to Max Muncy at 45, I love that. I can take Matt Beaty in the middle of the lineup. I don't really mind that because it helps offset some salary with 2,800 there, so that's kind of good. And then AJ Pollock, Gavin Lux toward the bottom of the lineup with absolutely no ownership on them. This is an interesting stack. It's going against a very good pitcher who is not getting a ton of ownership. I would like this a lot better if it was one of those situations where Woodruff was going to be pulling 15% ownership as an SP1. He's not. I know I talked about using Woodruff as an alternative SP1, and I still think that makes sense, but I definitely want to throw some of these low-owned Dodgers back the other way. Similar story on FanDuel, getting a little bit more of attention, but not really. That's only applicable to Mookie, really. Where you're paying down for him. 4,000 is a hilarious salary for Mookie Betts, but 12% ownership is probably too low. Corey Seager, 12%, and then everybody else, Justin Turner, 1% ownership. Please, absolutely sign me up. Max Muncy, position flexibility. I like getting to some of this confirmed Dodgers lineup. On the other side, I mentioned May and his strikeout upside. You can see the strikeout number 37.2% this year. Ridiculous. 165 xFIP, 0.94 whip in his 21 innings. I don't know how much of this Brewers lineup I want to get to. Pretty heavy strikeout lineup. They're priced way, way down. And if they chase May early, they get a bullpen game. Dodgers bullpen, pretty good. Some high-end arms in there, some of those flamethrowers. So I'm interested in how that matches up. But I'll take some of the questions that you guys are dropping in the YouTube chat in a sec, by the way. So keep firing away. Feel free. So I'm interested in... shit, I just clicked on the wrong thing. I'm going to open something up that'll slow us down. There goes Explorer. So I'm interested to see how that lines up. But I think Dustin May is in for a pretty high-end strikeout day. So I'm probably not getting a much Brewers. The Angels were coming up big time for me in the power model. So I want to take a look at that, and then we'll jump over to Fantasy Cruncher, answer some of those questions. So the Angels with LJ Newsome on the hill coming the other way. Great matchup here. Newsome, 24.4% strikeouts in his 10 innings so far this year. He was 13.2 in 15 innings last year. Young kid, not much significant upside. You can see the power marks for most of the Angels lineup here in my home run model, leading the way for most of the slate. The prices aren't really all that egregious, except for a little guy named Mike Trout in the middle, which we don't really question. Ohtani priced up on the DK slate. I guess 4,100 if we're calling 45 a high price on FanDuel. 41 is as well. I really like the upside for Ohtani here. Not egregious ownership at 18%. Trout getting a lot of focus on FanDuel, 33%. Difficult to use him as a one-off there. We'll get him. You'll see him come up in my 4-3s a lot, but the sorting process will end up raking at least some of those out. So like when Trout is going off at 33%, I'll typically be, maybe in the 20s overall between stacks and between where I get him as a one-off. I don't take him off the board as a one-off. He's the best player in baseball. I do want to get to him as a one-off. But anybody 30-ish%, that's starting to push it in terms of baseball ownership. Much rather have him around this 17% mark that you get him at DK. So the Angels are a really interesting team. Jared Walsh was my home run pick for the day. Really like that for a lefty. He's been slugging the hell out of the ball so far this year. High upside, high-end strikeout guy as well, but only pulling 5.5% ownership on FanDuel. That's a mistake. Upton still a lot of power, 5.4% ownership, 3,100 on FanDuel. Another mistake there. These guys are easy to put together with other teams. I like the positional flexibility you get around Ohtani and Jared Walsh, although they play the same two positions, so they kind of cancel one another's positional flexibility out. But it's kind of a unique look to put one at first base, one at util, and then fill in the rest with outfielders from another team, or grab some of the outfielders from this team. So there are interesting ways you can put the Angels together, and interesting ways that they go together with other stacks that make them stand out, in addition to the high-end power upside. So they're an interesting team. With that, let me see what you guys asked over in YouTube here. Just game stack up the other side of the Atlanta game and grab an ace. It's the way to go. Yeah, Jason Garnett, I don't disagree with you on that one. Atlanta stack looking very good. Definitely a lot of people owning it. I think both sides of that are going to look good for offense in this one. That game was totaled 2 full runs higher than any other game on the slate. I think Vegas is on to the fact that that's going to play like Coors East all year long. Gundacker talked about it yesterday. It's a minor league field anyway, and they're close to the water in a high humidity area. We haven't even seen the temperature spike yet in Florida. It's just May 1st. As we get through the season, that ballpark is going to be ridiculous if they keep playing there. So that's something to watch all season long. We're going to see explosive upside for offense there. Alex Kaiser, in this situation, single entry GPP, for example, does it make sense to lean towards lower owned bottom of the order with a Brave stack in order to prioritize the middle of the order with a second stack? That's a good question. I don't hate that because I like some hitters at the bottom of that Braves lineup. We can take a quick look over there. I was actually considering something similar. I forget whether that's where I landed on my placeholder. I also got to make sure I actually finished entering all my placeholder lineups to grab my spots. Otherwise, I might be frozen out of that. I didn't. Shit. Let me do that. Did that FanDuel contest fill yet? We'll find out. So, yeah, let me flip to the Braves while I'm doing that. Excuse me for having my phone open here, guys, but I do need to actually enter that contest that we're talking about so much here. Not that this would be a waste of my time otherwise, but I do like to actually enter these things. So, yeah, you can see I don't love Sandoval down there. I don't really totally believe in the reclamation project. I do like the fact that he's only 22,000 on FanDuel. So if you need him at third base, that's fine. But I prefer Riley at slightly lower ownership and paying up at 2,500. That's a lot more applicable on the DK slate where the ownership difference is really stark. You're paying up significantly, 4,200 as opposed to 2,700 over there, but you're talking about 26.3% ownership on Sandoval versus just 3.3 on Riley. So I like the Riley play from the bottom there, and I think Christian Pache, or however we're saying that name, is somewhat interesting. Dead minimum on FanDuel, not a lot of power displayed so far at the major league level. I wrote about this in my article today, by the way, so you can read about the individual hitters over there as well if I'm not going deep enough. But I think he's somewhat interesting for the minimum, and more interesting to me than Pablo Sandoval because he was getting like no ownership. He wraps around more directly to those hitters at the top of the lineup. He's got speed, which is interesting. So if he gets on base, he could be running. If he's on base, he can be running and legging out some hits to help these guys drive in runs to help him score run pad stats. And he's got interesting power upside. He's been a guy who's got a 55 grade power for raw power. Hasn't translated to game power at all through his minor league career. He hit 12 home runs in 2019 in, I think it was like 400 something. It's in my article. It's 400 something plate appearances across AA and AAA in 2019. He had 12 home runs. So there's not zero power in game power, but the 55 grade raw power hasn't totally translated to any pro performance, and he's yet to hit a home run at the major league level that I can remember. So there's, it's not an overly appealing DFS play on its surface, but I think there could be appeal in the wraparound and getting to him for the dead minimum, offsetting some ownership. So long answer, hope that helps. I think it's a good idea, and I think it is a good question. Thank you. Do you have any issues with the Boston game may rain out? Not that I'd seen. I wasn't really worried about it. It wasn't totally on my radar that there was a question mark. The Boston game, the roof is closed in Texas, so we don't have to worry about that at all. Keith Woodfork also asks, I'm getting a lot of the Jays Braves with one off in Boston in the cruncher for FanDuel. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those guys are projected very highly. So if you're getting too much of it, and too much is a relative thing, somewhat to, particularly with baseball, to what we're doing as individuals, what your individual preferences are, more so probably than some of the other sports where there are absolute mistakes and absolute right things to do in particularly basketball. In baseball, there are less extreme degrees of that. So depending on what you want to do, those could be good constructions. That is a great spot on both sides. I would shoot to cap some of those things and try and get probably below the field on those teams, or at least go for the Braves like we talked about in the top stacks when we were looking at that. Get to those guys and then maybe go below the field on the opposing side. This is the Angels lineup I need in here. So that would be my thoughts on that. And, maybe for baseball especially, I like to be pretty broad. I like to grab pretty much everybody on the slate, to be quite honest. So you'll see me get pretty broad here in a sec. Let me just grab the Angels updated projections, see if there was anything wacky in that lineup. Since we got the confirmed lineup, we'll jump in a cruncher. We'll give it about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to have to jump off to actually get some lineups created. Like the lineup for the Angels, doesn't look like anything unexpected. Fletcher, Ohtani, Trout, Rendon, Walsh, Upton, Pujols. Yeah, that's what we were looking for there. So we'll drop that's the wrong window. Drop the updated one into Fantasy Cruncher here. Let me give Fantasy Cruncher a quick refresh. Yeah, so I like that upside. I wonder if the Mariners are interesting on the other side of Griff Canning. If it seems like I'm stalling for time while Fantasy Cruncher reloads, that's exactly what's happening. Mitch Haniger, kind of an interesting bat up top. Kyle Seager, lefty-righty, is always interesting. Kyle Lewis, I like for a young player with upside. And these guys have no salary on them whatsoever, but they're kind of getting attention. Haniger drawing like 20% ownership on FanDuel, 26% is on DK. I'm guessing a lot of that is as one-offs. Seager's getting like 10% ownership on FanDuel, 8% on DK. Lewis around 11 on DK, but only 5 on FanDuel. So maybe if you're going to Mitch Haniger, maybe you want to do it as part of a somewhat contrarian Mariners stack. Definitely check that against the top stacks tool. I wouldn't ignore like Taylor Trammell down here, Dylan Moore down here with positional flexibility, Tommy Murphy, always catcher upside there for a lot of power in his bat. So the bottom of that could be a little bit sneaky if you're looking at it. I know some of the ownership marks aren't coming through there. Some of these guys need corrections that I just haven't gotten around to because I don't care. And I kind of know where they come up in Fantasy Cruncher at this point. I keep clicking over the wrong window here. Let's see if this is loaded for us. Come on. Don't freeze me up here. It would suck if Fantasy Cruncher doesn't load now. Yeah. I'll wait. So all the patient people who are sitting here watching me wait. Trying not to give you guys totally dead air here. There's only so much. There it goes. It was just the magic of needing to try to show it to you guys that pulled it up for us. Now the question is, will it let me upload any data or do anything else? This is not Fantasy Cruncher's fault again. If you guys are tuning in for my game plan show for the first time, just running the production suite on this laptop kind of slows down some of the other applications a little bit. So all we need to do in here, I've got projections uploaded already. We just need to drop in any update for the Angels real quick. Come on. And we can get into some quick Fantasy Cruncher settings. All right. So first thing I like to do in Fantasy Cruncher is jump over to the hitters tab. I've shown this before, but since we're doing a actual crunch, we'll talk it through. I like to sort by the batting order and then click over on the team, which gives you each team in the batting order, which is nice. And then we want to hit this little show bench guy here. Make sure that we're getting all the players on the slate. Come on. All right. And this is just to confirm that we don't have anybody who's in the lineup sitting deactivated or anybody who is out of lineup activated, right? So we're looking for these green guys. I want to make sure that my projection's properly uploaded here. I'm going to just take a quick detour here. I'm going to enable randomness so I can just check that I'm getting my correct randomness. I might as well do this while I'm here as well. I use randomness and I use 3 unique players. And that forces new stacks through in every lineup, whether you're using 4-4 or 4-3. Right, so we see we're getting our randomness, we're getting our exposure caps. These come preloaded from my update that you saw me drop in. Or actually, you didn't see that. I did that before the show. But those come preloaded out of my sheet. I did some cosmetics on some of the projections that were in here. But again, we're just looking to make sure that we have the right players in the pool, which we should. Don't think anything changed about that LA lineup. So let's see. That was the last one we were waiting on really here. Yep. So what we're looking for there is like sometimes you'll see it with like a guy with an orange still in there and like Pujols would be deactivated. So you just need to activate them. Shocker. And let's see. All these guys are the same way. Yep. So we're good here. So click over to my pool, get just to the guys we need, and then we're going to jump over to the pitchers, and we'll see how we manipulate the pitchers. My process does a lot for me. I mentioned this a lot in chat, and I've talked about it on shows. The process does a lot for me in terms of setting randomness and exposure caps for hitters. I do it pretty manually for the pitchers. I usually start with 55% randomness down the pitchers. I tend not to think that the pitchers need that much randomness in terms of where they land standard deviation wise or anything, but just for getting enough of a shimmy across 500 lineups that I want to crunch, that'll help get us to some of these other plays a little bit more and we'll get a bigger sample. So I try to get in here and set these exposures manually. Alex's projections are here. My projections are here. Make sure we're sorted by mine because, again, I've got a big head. And, we want to click over to Dustin May's Alex projection, though. Like I said, glad we remembered to do that off the top. Otherwise, we would have to rerun this whole thing. So that still puts May down the board a little bit in terms of my projection, but I did want to do this as well. I'm actually going to I am concerned about Charlie Morton. I think this is more where my model would be coming in. And I want to cut the ownership. Actually, I don't care about that. You know what? Actually, I'm going to go back to Alex's projection because with that, I forgot about the ownership. With the ownership, I will take a little bit. I'll take like 10%, Charlie. I'll leave it there. You know what? I might give him a little more. Well, not 5,755. That would be aggressive randomness. That would definitely get us to 10%, Charlie Morton. Dustin May, I'm going to kick up a little bit in terms of randomness as well, since he's projecting lower than some of these other guys. I want to get to a significant share of Dustin May. I'm going to let him get out to like 22%. I am going to take a pretty broad swath of Blake Snell here, I think. Why is LJ Newsome sorted at the top? Sometimes Cruncher gets wonky with how you sort it. If you click to another column, resort it by another column, and then go back to the one you were trying to sort by, it's usually the My Projection column as well. So that'll help with getting back to that. So getting back into this, now, yeah. All right, so I want to get to, I said below the field a little bit, but I think we can be aggressive. Let's let Blake Snell come in around the field. We will let Eduardo come in around 25%. Obviously, we're not going to hit these caps with all these guys because it would be too much. Jack Gillen coming a little bit above. Griff was getting too much ownership if memory served. I do want to get to some of that salary savings, though, there. Then we'll give him around that 22% mark as well. And then Woodruff, gonna have to be aggressive with the randomness here. Give him a heavy dose of randomness so that we can get him out to like 3x with the 15% there. Probably will come up short. I am inclined to just do this, and this to take those guys just off the board entirely. If Austin Gomber beats me tonight, so be it. If LJ Newsome beats me tonight, so be it. I'm fine with that. Jordan Lyles, I don't think is gonna beat us. Alex has a much better projection for him than I do, but I think the guy that is potentially interesting is still DeSclafani here, and with 0.6% of the field, I'm gonna get aggressive on this randomness. Let's see where 95 takes us, and we'll give him 12%. Give him a little wiggle room there. Back to my pool. All right, so now we've got our pitchers set. We've got our hitters set. Going to run some of these. We got to set the stacks. Probably not going to have a ton of time to look through how all this comes together in the end, but at least we're getting a look at how Fantasy Cruncher works, which probably everybody here knows. Yeah, some of these guys aren't getting randomness. I'm just going to give a little randomness to some of the guys that weren't coming up in formulas, which is, again, needing to be corrected in my model here. You can see I've talked about how I set the randomness. The power hitters get a pretty significant share, and then some of the lower price guys should be getting a pretty significant share through here as well. So that's how we do that. Those guys are covered. I think we've got projections on everybody. Let me pull up the stacks here. We're going to run some 4-4s to start with. We'll see how those come together. I think if you go 2 gaps on the 4-4s, I can check against my little chart here where this should be and give it a little bit of room. That handy little chart we got over here for even distribution, which I like to go a little bit above. What do we got? 6 games? You'd think I would remember this by now. Yeah, 10.5 would be even distribution. So let's give them a little 12 shot here because there's some underperformers on the board. 12 and 12 is going to get us out to 24% on some of the higher on stacks, but that'll come out in the wash in the sorting table that we probably aren't going to get a chance to explore here, but we'll see. Hopefully FC flies. Let's take 100 off the top and see where we land. This should give us a couple minutes to talk. What do you guys want to talk about? Anybody got any questions? Did we drop any new questions in the YouTube chat? Let's see. I can close you now because I'm done with you, Labs. Yeah, sure, Alex. Alex appreciates it. Alex Kaiser. I appreciate you, Alex Kaiser. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate it. Guys, if you have questions, throw them at me there. Let's see if anybody in Slack is asking anything or saying anything wrong that I can correct if they're not listening. Woody C, time for some baseball. I agree, Woody. Woody's been hanging out ready for baseball since what was that? Maybe December in the baseball channel, just getting ready. Kind of like I was year before last. I was dropping a X days till spring training starts for all of the winter of 2019 into 2020, and we all know how that came out with the baseball season and when it actually ended up starting. So Woody, not the jinx that I was, fortunately for us in the Slack channels. I'm obviously going to have to stay on the Fantasy Cruncher window if we want this thing to do anything at all. So we'll kind of watch this as it goes, see where we land. And pull up the pictures. This is one way. Somebody was asking about what I like to pay attention to in terms of pitcher distribution or stack distribution. And the answer is kind of both. A lot of it has to do with stack distribution underneath the pitcher. There goes my phone. When you have time, it makes a lot of sense to check into each of the individual pitchers and then which combinations of which stacks you're getting, particularly when you're looking at pay-up options. Are the Brewers striking out more than expected? I guess it depends on... Cubs fan asks if the Brewers are striking out more than expected. I guess that depends on whose expectations we're talking about. But let's take a quick look. Milwaukee is striking out 29.8% of the time, second worst in baseball against lefties, 26.7% of the time in the bottom 10 against righties. So that is a definitely good strikeout spot for our pal Dustin May. So good question. Definitely a spot I'm targeting on the board, particularly with May going significantly underowned. I like that a lot. And you can see in Fantasy Cruncher there, fortunately, Dustin May coming up quite a bit for me. I think Eduardo Rodriguez, right on cue, he jumped to the top. I love that. I think Eduardo Rodriguez, we said, was getting a little bit too much ownership, but again, with those numbers coming in where they are, I'm comfy getting a spread of pitching. Let's see where we're spending on salary. So you can see, I mean, this is kind of a good example of something I talk about a lot with lineups leaving a lot of salary on the board. This first lineup off the top here is one of the higher projected out of the 6 that you guys can see. I think you guys can see 6. Yeah, out of the 6 you guys can see, that's the highest projected lineup. It's got Blake Snell pitching. It's got a Red Sox and Dodgers stack that includes JD Martinez, includes Mookie Betts. Yeah, it's using Matt Beatty. It's using Christian Arroyo, but Christian Arroyo is leading off. It's using Bobby Dahlbeck. I love Bobby Dahlbeck. He's got a ridiculous power upside. It's using Hunter Renfroe. I love Hunter Renfroe. He's got a ridiculous power upside. It's not our lineup's fault. It's not our attempt to construct these lineups' fault that these players are priced the way they are. If we want to get to a Dodgers Red Sox stack that has potential to be under-owned, is still strongly projected, at least in my model, this makes sense. This is leaving $2,000 on the table. So it just makes sense. You're leaving aggressive salary on the table, but this is a 1, 2, 3, 5 Dodgers stack with the best talent-wise pitcher on the board in Blake Snell, and a 7-8-1-3, which is a little offbeat construction, but you're getting a ton of power in that lineup on the Red Sox side. You could easily look at that as two mans in terms of just two different pieces of an upside Red Sox lineup. I like this lineup. This would probably make my entries. Just looking at some of these others, they're spending the salary more efficiently, but you're talking about I like this lineup a hell of a lot more than I like this lineup with the Texas stack that I hate. So yeah, I'm getting Dustin May here, but this is clunky. I do like Willie Calhoun as a hitter. These are the guys I would probably want to be on if I'm going to that Texas stack. So I'll let that stand. It's not like I'm going to delete it, but you can see the difference in just, in terms of the median projection in those lineups. This is a good one. Gallon I like that. I'm not going to, I'll continue taking a look, but it's not really part of my process unless I've got a lot of time, which today I won't. But I love doing this, just sitting here and looking at some of the ways that these things come together, looking at some of the options that Fantasy Cruncher is building for you. And if you get uncomfortable with some of those stacks in terms of, this one over here is actually really good in terms of the way the Boston came together with the 2, 3, 4, 7, Dustin May on top. You're getting to Colorado as a contrarian play against that heavy Zach Gallen ownership. It's kind of interesting. Trevor Story, Ryan McMahon, and CJ Cron all in it. Tapia leading off. That's a good lineup. Projects out pretty well. That's a good lineup. So sometimes when I'm doing these, I fall in love with these lineups too, and I just make a little side tab and then just make sure that those get direct entry, bypass the process. Probably a bad move. Probably a a leak in the game, but hey, sometimes we get biased about these things. This one, I don't love how this one's spending the money, right? I talked about not loving the spot for Charlie Morton. It's an Arizona, it's a Colorado lineup going up against, the chalky pitcher in terms of Gallen there. And then it's a Mariners lineup going against the chalk value pitcher. But I just see downside for the Mariners. This is a good construction of that Mariners lineup. 1, 2, 3, 4. I like that. I like the construction of the lineup. I just don't know that I love combining these two teams with Charlie Morton and leaving that much on the table. You could probably just do this and get to a better pitcher, and then I like the lineup better. Yeah, right? This is a much better lineup. At least for me. Now we're spending 34.4, so sometimes there are improvements to be made. So I'm not saying take anything point blank and just leave it on the board if it's leaving salary on the table. Think these things through. Cubs and I talk about that a lot. XX Cubs fan. He's a sharp guy. You guys should talk to him in Slack chat. Bombard him with questions. He loves it. But we talk about that every now and again in terms of where you want to strategically leave salary on the table. I am totally comfortable with that first lineup leaving $2,000 on the table. I like that. I was not comfortable getting that Charlie Morton lineup and leaving $2,000 on the table. So it's all about efficiency of the spend as well. This one over here I'd be a little worried about. It's only spending $30,000. You can cap these things. I leave it open. You can always cap these things. A lot of it will come out in the wash, like a 136 projection. Even with the ownership, the way that I weight it, this 136 projection would probably not make the top end of the sorting process. So I don't worry about it. But you can cap it if you're worried about getting lineups like that. You can certainly cap it. Put a 32,000 spend cap on it, maybe on FanDuel. I think that's fair. But like this one's only spending 30,700. But it's getting to Gallen in a good spot. It's getting to a 4.578 Red Sox and a 1.756. I don't love the 1.756. I know it wraps around from 7 to 1 there. I would probably try and correct this given money to spend and time to do it. And again, the projection would probably wipe this out in the wash. But at least like this is the foundation of a good lineup. And you can't tell me that this lineup couldn't win a tournament. It certainly could. So like there's an argument to be made in the right spots for even leaving an aggressive amount of salary on the table if a lineup comes together right. Like I said, I would probably get into this one. Maybe you use that salary more efficiently and look to, you don't want to necessarily replace Mookie because even though he does, doesn't necessarily click together with those guys in the stack in terms of the lineup and the gaps in there. But if you wanted to say, if we're considering the 6.71 as a true wraparound, which it stretches credulity, but if you wanted to use a lot of that money on upgrading $2,100 Matt Beatty to somebody like JD Martinez, Mike Trout, Joey Gallo, Marcelo Ozuna, might make more sense because he's probably going to be lower owned than Mike Trout as a one-off. I talked about maybe not using Trout as a one-off, but if you want to do it, this is probably a lowish owned kind of a lineup where you can do it. Plenty of salary to spend to get there, so you can reconstruct some of those builds that way within Fantasy Cruncher before you move them out to your sorting process if you have time. Scrolling through some more of these. So we're seeing Blake Snell starting to trickle up toward the top of ownership, which makes sense. I'm going to adjust Dustin May so that I'm getting to more of them here. I want to get aggressive about my Dustin May shares if he's not going to be that owned on FanDuel. I think that is a good spot. If it burns me, it burns me, but I'm comfortable getting aggressive about it. So I'm going to give him a kick in terms of the ones that I actually enter. But you can see I kind of am intrigued by the way this is coming together, and it's landing a lot along the lines of what we talked through. Right? We're getting to these three pitchers more. We're getting to these guys a little bit, but less so than the public on Gallen. Probably a little bit more than the public on Woodruff. I'll probably end up giving him a little kick as well. I might want to squeeze a little bit more of the leverage there. And then getting a little bit of the value play in Canning. But not overexposing him in terms of where the field was getting him, which I think makes some sense. I'm kind of curious. Since I'm not going to move these over, I'm like out of time because I do want to crunch some of my lineups, and we've come up around an hour, I think. So hopefully that was helpful. A little live before lock run, but I do want to take a look. Let's see what's in these Canning lineups. So this is something I was talking about, right? 3 out of I didn't scroll up enough. 4 out of the 7 lineups for Canning include Blue Jays. 2, 3, 4. 4 of the lineups also include Braves, and they're stacked in 3 of them together, which is not necessarily bad. Like, this one's high end. You can see this one's going to Canning as the value pitcher, and then going to this Braves Blue Jays combo, which is the highest upside game on the slate in terms of our run total. But we're also going to pretty highly owned teams, and we're not spending that salary savings efficiently. So it doesn't really make sense to use Canning there. And more to the point, it is something to pay attention to, winding back around to what I started talking about, paying attention to the stack distribution underneath each of those pitcher plays. Because if you're using Canning as a frequent one-off, and all of the field is too, well, you don't necessarily want to always be getting to the same options with him, right? So we're seeing Braves all over the board. We're seeing Dodgers all over the board. You want to get a little bit of distribution. Now, when you crunch more lineups, it becomes more easy to get to those distributions, but you want to distribute these stacks a little bit more evenly underneath these plays. So it makes sense to start looking at some of that too. Make sure you're getting to the upside. Make sure that you're using the savings efficiently and paying for the right bats. It might make sense to use Canning in like 4-2-2s, particularly on a not short slate, but a shorter slate. 4-3-1s, obviously, might make sense to use them and spend that money well on your one-off. Don't go to too highly own the one-off, but spend it well. So just kind of an interesting way to look at things on the board. But that's basically, when given time, like I said, that's how I like to look through things, and that's kind of what I'm going to be getting to on the slate, guys. I hope it wasn't too redundant with the show we did earlier in the day that went through some of this game by game. Hopefully we picked up some. I'll take a look on Keith Woodford, Chris Hogan, why do bad things happen to good pitchers? That's baseball, man. They talk about it a lot with pitching. You see the classic story of 10 good games, 10 bad games, and then the 10 that fall in the middle decide whether you're a good pitcher or a bad pitcher every season. That's a little bit silly and a little bit of baseball nonsense. For basketball people, Lamb is out, so is Goga Batadze. But the truth does fall in the middle somewhere there. Like for the elite guys, you'll see maybe 22, 23 very good starts and only a couple clunkers and some in the mid-range. But it's baseball. There's a ton of variance there. Jason Garnett likes Carson Kelly and Escobar a shitload versus a lefty today. Yeah, I talked about that. The Diamondbacks are smoking left-handed pitching this year. You can see how difficult it is for me to stop talking about this stuff. God, I love it. It's so much fun. I'm going to go through this and the last question, and then I'm getting the hell out of here so I can actually build lineups. But it is interesting. It is worth looking at. And that's why Arizona's getting, I think, so much ownership here. But this is the this year board. Sort of the wrong way. I'm cursing a little bit more because we're behind the paywall. I assume all you guys can take it. I don't know if they're like YouTube censorship or anything. I hope I don't get us banned. Sorry, guys. You can see, like I said, Arizona smoking left-handed pitching this year. 271 ISO. That is so far ahead of the field. It's going to come down. They've faced fewer lefties so far this season, but an 18.8% strikeout rate for the lefties they face. There's no arguing with that. Creating runs 43% better than average. Yeah, there's a lot to like there. It was an interesting spot on the board. Gomber, I wrote about this in the article, so you can check out thoughts there as well. But and I talked about it at the top of the show as well. But Gomber's been really good so far in his career at keeping the ball in the yard specifically. But there's a lot of noise in that. That's not something that's necessarily predictive. Missing barrels not necessarily something predictive. So when we talk about it on shows and stuff, kind of take that with a grain of salt, at least more than some of the ratio-based stats, some of the stats with more data behind them. It's important to understand where those stats are coming from and what they actually mean. So yeah, there's definitely upside in Arizona. I'm just concerned about the ownership. The other thing was Keith Woodford asking, hey man, do you think we can do an advanced cruncher class for things like how cruncher advanced options work? Yeah, we've done a bunch of them kind of in these game plan shows behind the paywall. If you've got any specific questions, Keith, feel free to shoot me a DM or hit me up in the DFS 101 channel is great for that stuff. I've got the little study group channel, so you can feel free to hit me up to get added to either of those, or just DM me if you don't want to talk about it in the public space where other people chime in or anything. But yeah, I encourage you to check out the game plan shows specifically. A lot of guys you're smarter than me. You get Alex a few days a week. You get the Colts. You get Steve, and you get Sean's on a couple days a week. So those guys have won like millions of dollars doing this.
I would like to say I'm on my way there, but we ain't quite there yet. But I think I'm into the six figures in winnings at this point. It got to be. Yeah. So, I've done my share of winning as well. So hopefully you get some good stuff from me. But for me, it's more about watching those guys in there and them doing their stuff. I get a lot of that. So it's not necessarily all Fantasy Cruncher focused, but just DFS wise, process wise, and all the good things that those guys are doing. There's so much to be absorbed there. So I encourage you to check those out. But yeah, always happy to talk shop on Fantasy Cruncher. God, I can even turn a "can we have more advanced answers in Fantasy Cruncher" answer into a long-winded answer. God. All right, I'm getting out of here, guys. I appreciate the hang. Hopefully this was valuable, and hit me up anytime with questions in Slack. But right now I got to crunch some lineups and get my entries in. I'll see you later. Queued that up before I had to stop